Okay, so we are, let me think how many pages. I think we have gone through 3 pages, so we should be slide 13. And it's what it says is sexual characteristics, hormones, testosterone. Okay, that's where we are. And so we're right here at the end of our little brief journey through the male reproductive system. And I just said that the testosterone is produced by those interstitial cells. And so testosterone is going to produce body hair, muscle mass. Also, there's some structures. In my A&P classes, they talk about how during development there are some bony changes and sort of hard kind of structural changes associated with masculinization. And one of them is a more prominent brow. It's so you can sometimes you can look at a person who might be pretending to be the other sex. Now I know this is a kind of a touchy subject, but I need to talk about it anyway. So if you grow up male and maybe you internally feel you should be a female, even though you go through treatments to maybe produce breast and so forth, the changes, unfortunately, I guess, that have occurred during development are not reversible. Some of these masculinizing changes, such as a more prominent brow and a lower voice, a larger larynx. And so that's why sometimes people who become transgender or female impersonators because of, their mental makeup, who they internally feel they should be, you can still sometimes tell that they look male because there are these changes that are not reversible, unfortunately. So that's these are influences of testosterone still that I'm talking about. Okay, so testosterone is also going to aid in the production of the sperm cells, but the two main hormones that are pushing for the production of the sperm cells are follicle stimulating hormone and something called luteinizing hormone. So these two hormones are what are stimulating the production of the sperm cells. Now this isn't on my slides, but I need to mention it just so that you can logically understand the travels of the sperm cell in the female reproductive tract. It ends up, I'd said, the sperm cells have lost the ability to care for themselves. And I said, in the seminiferous tubules, they had a helper, these Sertoli cells. But now, when they are ejaculated, when they are introduced into the woman, they still don't have the ability to care for themselves. And so, when we talk about this internal fertilization process, we talk about semen, and we don't say sperm, we say semen. Now the reason for that is we have some organs, male reproductive organs, the seminiferous tubules and the prostate gland in particular, and the epididymis. They're all going to add to this fluid that is transporting the sperm into the female reproductive tract. And this fluid contains nutrients and other material that are caring for the sperm cell for up to a couple of days. So the sperm cells will survive in the female reproductive tract for around 48 hours. Okay, so that brings us to the female. And so we had said that the primary sex organ in the female is the ovary. And we had said, and we haven't looked at this yet, but we had said that in the ovaries you produce ovums, mature oocytes, which we refer to as an ovum. And these actually are produced under the influence of the same hormone that is stimulating the production of the sperm cells. It's something called follicle stimulating hormone. So in follicle stimulating hormone, when it has its influence on the ovary, what it does is it causes some of the primordial oocytes. These are the cells that can become an egg. Some of the primordial oocytes will start developing in a fluid-filled chamber. You'll have, under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone, you'll have 4 or 5 of the primordial oocytes will start developing in a fluid-filled chamber called a follicle. Now, in the males, we said we have certain cells that produce testosterone, right? We had said in the male, it's the interstitial cells. And we said the female gonad, the oocyte, it also is going to be producing the female sex hormone. Well, you know where it's made? In that follicle. The follicle is filled with, it contains the ovum that is maturing, getting ready to be released, and the fluid that it's in is filled with estrogen. And this estrogen is leaving the follicle and increasing in concentration within the female's circulatory system. So once a female, so a girl, once the female becomes sexually mature and starts producing eggs, then this estrogen starts producing the secondary sexual characteristics that we think of for women. The breast and other, and the curvy shape, all of that is the under the influence of estrogen. Okay. All right, so I don't know, we have something here that's a little out of slide number 14 or 16, I guess it is. The last slide on page 4. It's talking about the embryo versus the fetus. So later on, after we talk about fertilization, we haven't even gotten there yet, we'll talk about how early in development we have an embryo. And then a little bit later on, after the 8th week, we change our terminology, is what we're saying. And we don't call it an embryo. It's a fetus now. Okay. Anyway, that slide obviously really should be later on when we're talking about development, and I'll try to remember to mention it when we're talking on Thursday. All right, so let me go on to the next page here, page 5. And so when we are thinking of this ovary, it's going to develop, we had said it's going to produce these fluid-filled cavities, and they're really big relative to the ovary itself. I used to breed horses, and any kind of animal breeding is very high-tech now. Well, maybe not dogs, but you know what I mean. With livestock in particular, it's very high-tech. And so I would take my mare to a vet that I worked with, and we would monitor the development of the follicles. And so in a horse, the ovary is pretty good size. It's probably as big as my hand right there. And you would have the primary follicle would be like 2 or 3 inches long. It'd be like a big fluid-filled, like a blister almost, on the surface of the ovary. And it would cover like a half of one side of the ovary. And so you have this fluid-filled follicle that ultimately will release the egg. Now, what happened? We had said as the egg was developing, the more and more estrogen was being released into the circulatory system. Now, you have an organ in your brain called the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is the organ the endocrine organ that is producing follicle stimulating hormone. But it also produces another hormone. It produces luteinizing hormone. And in males, we said that helps produce sperm cells. Well, in females, what happens is as the estrogen level rises and that follicle gets bigger and bigger and bigger, then the egg is ready to be released. And so you get a large pulse of luteinizing hormone, and it causes ovulation. The egg is released into the female reproductive tract. Now, after it is released, the structure that's left, and this is on page 5 of the slide number 1, the structure that is left is called a corpus luteum. And what that really means is yellow body. Corpus is body, luteum yellow. And it has a job. You know, you'd think of it as just the leftovers, but it has a job. It's going to produce progesterone, another hormone, because your body doesn't know if you're going to get pregnant or not. And in your uterus, so you say, okay, so you got this egg, and maybe it gets fertilized, and then what happens to that egg? Oh, it makes its way into the uterus and implants in the lining of the uterus. And so progesterone, what it does is it keeps you from losing the lining of the uterus, because who knows, maybe you got pregnant. Your body doesn't know for a little while. So that's what is going to happen. Now, if you didn't get pregnant, after about 2 weeks, the corpus luteum stops producing progesterone, and a woman enters into the menstrual cycle. And that's when she loses the lining. And then the whole thing starts all over again after that, and you start developing follicles and, so on and so forth. I'm going to go on and stop here, and we're going to talk about the travels of the ovum and the travels of the sperm cell, and perhaps even we'll talk about fertilization. Yeah, we will. Okay, next talk.